Now we play by my rules.
The mahogany coffin gleamed under the funeral home's fluorescent lights like a cruel joke my father would have appreciated. Standing there in my wrinkled black suit, watching mourners file past with their practiced expressions of sympathy, I couldn't help but think Dad was probably laughing from whatever afterlife he'd managed to talk his way into. He always said funerals were for the living, and mine had just become a three-ring circus. "Elliot, darling, you look absolutely dreadful." Veronica's voice cut through the hushed conversations like a scalpel through silk. My wife of 18 years stood in the doorway wearing a designer black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like she was auditioning for the role of Ice Queen in some twisted fairy tale. Behind her lurked Lucas Brand, 25 years old and radiating the kind of cocky confidence that only comes from never having earned anything in your life. His perfectly pressed suit and practiced expression of concern fooled exactly nobody who bothered to look past the surface. Unfortunately, most people never bothered. "Hello, Veronica," I said, my voice carrying the weight of months of growing distance between us. "Thank you for coming." She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown timer. "We need to talk, privately." The funeral director, a thin man named Patterson who looked like he'd been embalmed himself, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps after the service, Mrs. Harrow?" "Now," Veronica said, her tone brooking no argument. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, holding it like a tool. "This can't wait." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of dealing with difficult sources as a journalist had taught me to never let them see you sweat. "What is it?" "Divorce papers." She said it loud enough for the entire room to hear, her voice carrying a note of triumph that made my skin crawl. I'm done pretending we have a marriage worth saving. The conversations around us died, like someone had flipped a switch. I could feel dozens of eyes boring into me, waiting to see how I'd react to being publicly humiliated at my own father's funeral. Veronica had always been theatrical, but this was a new low even for her. "Here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "At Dad's funeral? Your father's dead, Elliot. The rest of us still have lives to live." She thrust the envelope at me with enough force that I had to step back. "Sign them. The house, the business, everything, it's all legally mine now anyway." That's when I noticed Maddie and Owen standing near the back of the room, their faces twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. My 17-year-old daughter looked at me like I was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe, while my 14-year-old son couldn't even meet my eyes. "We're changing our last name to Brand," Maddie announced, her voice carrying across the silent room like a sharp crack. "You're dead to us anyway." The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. These were my children, the kids I'd taught to ride bikes and helped with homework and tucked into bed every night for years. Now they stood there looking at me with pure hatred, and I couldn't understand how we'd gotten to this point. Lucas stepped forward, his hand resting possessively on Veronica's lower back. "Nothing personal, Elliot. Just business." I took the envelope with hands that somehow remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Around us, the funeral home had gone completely silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. "I'll review these with my lawyer," I said finally, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Veronica smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "You do that, but remember, I've been planning this for a long time. Every I is dotted, every T is crossed. You've got nothing left, Elliot. Nothing." She turned to leave, Lucas trailing behind her like a well-dressed shadow. The kids followed without so much as a backward glance, leaving me standing alone next to my father's coffin with an envelope full of legal documents and a room full of witnesses to my public destruction. That's when I remembered something my father had told me the night before he died. When he'd called me to his bedside with urgent, whispered words about changes he'd made to his will. Something about protecting the family legacy from people who didn't deserve it. Something Veronica didn't know about yet. The house felt different without Dad's presence, like a theater after the final curtain call. I sat in his study, surrounded by decades of accumulated memories and the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco, staring at the divorce papers spread across his mahogany desk. Every page was a masterpiece of legal precision, designed to strip me of everything I'd ever worked for. Veronica had been thorough. I had to give her that. The house where I'd grown up, The antique business I'd built from nothing after leaving journalism. Even the small trust fund my grandparents had established. According to these documents, all of it belonged to her now. The phone rang, jarring me out of my contemplation. Miriam Gold's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt a small surge of relief. If anyone could make sense of this legal nightmare, it was Dad's oldest friend and the sharpest lawyer in 3 counties. "Elliot, I heard about what happened at the funeral," Miriam said without preamble. Her voice carried the same no-nonsense tone that had intimidated opposing counsel for 30 years. "Are you all right?" "Define all right," I said, leaning back in Dad's leather chair. "My wife just served me divorce papers at my father's funeral. My kids hate me for reasons I don't understand, and apparently I'm about to lose everything I own." "About that," Miriam said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. There are some things we need to discuss regarding your father's will." "What kind of things?" "The kind that are better discussed in person. 9 o'clock sharp, Elliot. And bring those divorce papers." She hung up before I could ask any more questions, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense that there was more to this situation than met the eye. I poured myself 3 fingers of Dad's best scotch and tried to piece together how my life had fallen apart so completely. 6 months ago, everything had seemed normal. Veronica was busy with her charity work, the kids were doing well in school, and my antique business was thriving. Then Lucas Brand had appeared, supposedly helping Veronica organize some fundraising event, and everything had started to change. The kids became distant and hostile, parroting phrases that sounded suspiciously like Veronica's words. Old friends stopped calling. Invitations to social events dried up. It was like someone had been systematically poisoning my reputation, one relationship at a time. I was still mulling this over when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this. A friend." My laptop was still open on Dad's desk, and it took only a few clicks to access my email account. The message was from a generic Gmail address with no identifying information, but the attachment made my blood run cold. It was a series of screenshots showing text conversations between Veronica and Lucas, dating back almost a year. The early messages were flirtatious but relatively innocent. The later ones were anything but. "Once the old man dies, everything will be ours," one message read. "Elliot's too trusting to see it coming." "What about the kids?" Lucas had replied. "Already taken care of. I've been telling them stories about their father for months. By the time this is over, they'll be begging to change their names." I scrolled through message after message, each one revealing another layer of the conspiracy that had destroyed my family. They'd planned everything, the timing of the divorce, the public humiliation at the funeral, even the way they'd turned my children against me. But the final message was the one that made my hands shake with rage. "The best part is, he'll never see it coming. Elliot's always been too much of a gentleman to fight dirty. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." I sat back in Dad's chair, the scotch burning in my throat, and felt something cold and calculating settle into place behind my ribs. Veronica was right about one thing. I'd always been too much of a gentleman to fight dirty. Maybe it was time to change that. Miriam Gold's law office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian mansion downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather-bound legal volumes that seemed to whisper of justice served and scores settled. I arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, the divorce papers tucked under my arm like evidence at a crime scene. Miriam herself was a woman who could have stepped out of a film noir classic. Silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She'd been Dad's friend for 40 years and his lawyer for 30, which meant she knew where every family skeleton was buried. "Sit down, Elliot," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We have a lot to discuss." I handed her the divorce papers and watched her flip through them with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen every dirty trick in the book. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was seriously annoyed. "Impressive work," she said finally. "Veronica's lawyer is thorough, I'll give him that. Unfortunately for them, they're operating under some faulty assumptions." "Such as?" Miriam opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder marked with my father's name. "Such as the assumption that they know what your father's will actually says. The document they based these papers on is 3 years old. Your father made some significant changes the week before he died." She spread several documents across her desk, and I felt my pulse quicken as I scanned the legal language. The house, the business, the trust fund, none of it was going to Veronica. In fact, according to the new will, she was entitled to exactly what Maine state law required for a surviving spouse: 1/3 of the marital assets and only those acquired during the marriage. How is this possible? I asked. Veronica said she had everything locked up legally. Your father was many things, but he wasn't stupid, Miriam said with a thin smile. He suspected something was going on between your wife and that boy, so he hired a private investigator. When the evidence came back, he called me immediately. She handed me another folder, this one filled with photographs and surveillance reports. Lucas and Veronica at restaurants, hotels, even my own house when they thought I was out of town. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. He wanted to, but he was worried about the children. He thought if you knew, you might do something rash that would hurt your relationship with them permanently. Miriam's expression softened slightly. He loved those kids, Elliot. He wanted to protect them from the worst of this. I thought about Maddie and Owen's faces at the funeral, the pure hatred in their eyes, and wondered if Dad's caution had been misplaced. They already hated me, and I didn't even know why. There's something else, Miriam continued. The investigator your father hired is still available. Cal Monroe, ex-police detective, very discreet, very thorough. If you want to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy goes, he's your man. She handed me a business card with Monroe's contact information. I should warn you, Elliot, once you start down this path, there's no going back. Right now, you're the victim in this story. If you decide to fight back, that might change. I thought about Veronica's triumphant smile at the funeral, about Lucas's smirk, about my children looking at me like I was the villain in their story. Then I thought about the text messages, the careful planning, the months of systematic destruction of my life and relationships. Set up a meeting with Monroe, I said. It's time I learned exactly what I'm dealing with. An hour later, I was sitting in a booth at the Wire Trap, a dive bar on the wrong side of downtown that served as the unofficial headquarters for everyone who didn't quite fit into polite society. The owner, Brenda Murphy, was a force of nature disguised as a middle-aged bartender, someone who knew everyone's secrets and wasn't afraid to share them with the right audience. Elliot Harrow, she said, sliding a beer across the scarred wooden table. Heard you had quite the day yesterday. News travels fast. Honey, in a town this size, news travels at the speed of light, especially when it involves Veronica Harrow making a scene. Brenda's expression turned serious. For what it's worth, most folks think she's a piece of work. That boy she's running around with isn't winning any popularity contests either. What do you mean? Lucas Brand? Please. Kid's been bragging all over town about how he's going to be rich soon, how he's got some older woman wrapped around his finger. Made quite the impression at the country club last week, apparently. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He's been talking about this publicly? Oh, honey, he's been practically taking out ads in the paper. Your wife might be smart, but that boy's got all the discretion of a neon sign. Brenda leaned across the table, lowering her voice. Word is, he's been telling people he's going to law school on someone else's dime, if you know what I mean. Before I could respond, the door opened, and a rumpled man in his 50s walked in, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. Cal Monroe looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for an ex-cop turned private investigator. Weathered face, cheap suit, and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much of humanity's darker side. Mr. Harrow, he said, extending a hand. Miriam Gold said you might need my services. Depends on what those services include, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. Monroe settled into the booth and accepted a beer from Brenda with a nod of thanks. I worked for your father for about 6 months, documenting your wife's extracurricular activities. Got enough evidence to sink a battleship, if that's what you're looking for. I'm looking for the truth, all of it. The truth is, your wife and her boyfriend have been planning this for almost a year. They've been systematically destroying your reputation, turning your kids against you, and positioning themselves to take everything you own. Monroe pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of photographs. They've also been skimming money from your joint accounts and your wife's charity organization. The images showed Lucas at expensive restaurants, driving a new BMW, wearing clothes that cost more than most people made in a month, all of it funded by money that should have been going to help underprivileged children. Here's the thing, though, Monroe continued. Your boy Lucas isn't as smart as he thinks he is. He's been bragging about this all over town, leaving a digital trail a mile wide. If you want to take them down, I can give you everything you need. I stared at the photographs, thinking about my father's words about protecting the family legacy from people who didn't deserve it. Veronica and Lucas had declared war on me, destroyed my relationship with my children, and stolen money meant for charity. Maybe it was time to show them what a real war looked like. Do it, I said. I want everything you can find. Monroe smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Now you're talking my language. 3 days later, I was parked across the street from the downtown parking garage, watching Lucas Brand climb out of his shiny new BMW like he owned the world. Monroe's intelligence had been thorough. Lucas came here every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, supposedly to study at the law library, but actually to meet with a bookie who ran numbers out of the 3rd floor. My phone buzzed with a text from Monroe. Target acquired. You sure about this? I typed back, absolutely. Lucas disappeared into the garage's stairwell, and I gave him 5 minutes before following. The 3rd floor was mostly empty at this time of day. Just a few cars scattered around the concrete expanse and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I found Lucas exactly where Monroe said he'd be, leaning against his car and counting a stack of bills with the satisfied expression of someone who'd never earned an honest dollar in his life. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and his face went through several interesting expressions before settling on fake concern. Elliot, what a surprise. I was just, studying. Studying what? The racing forms? His face flushed, but he tried to maintain his composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. I stepped closer, keeping my voice conversational. Tell me, Lucas, how does it feel to be living off stolen money? I haven't stolen anything. Veronica and I are in love, and you've been planning to rob me blind for almost a year. I've seen the text messages. The color drained from his face, but he recovered quickly. You're pathetic, you know that? Veronica told me you'd probably try something like this when you realized you'd lost everything. Lost everything? I laughed, and the sound echoed off the concrete walls. That's where you're wrong, Lucas. See, my father was smarter than both of you combined. He changed his will before he died. Veronica gets exactly what the law requires, 1/3 of the marital assets. Everything else stays with me. Lucas's expression shifted from confident to confused to worried in the space of a few seconds. You're lying. Am I? Why don't you ask Veronica to call her lawyer? I'm sure he'll be very interested to learn about those text messages. I turned to walk away, but Lucas grabbed my arm. Wait, we can work something out. I'm sure there's a deal we can make. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Take your hand off me, Lucas. He let go immediately, but the damage was done. I'd seen the desperation in his eyes, the moment when he realized his carefully planned future was crumbling around him. Here's the deal, I said, pulling out my phone. You've got 24 hours to return every penny you've stolen from the charity accounts. If you don't, these photos of you at the bookie go to the State Bar Association, along with a detailed report of your gambling debts. I showed him the screen, which displayed several crystal-clear images Monroe had taken of Lucas's weekly meetings. His face went white. You can't prove anything? I don't have to prove anything to the Bar Association. I just have to raise questions about your character and fitness to practice law. Think they'll be interested in someone with a compulsive gambling problem who steals from children's charities? Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. Behind me, I heard him kick his car door in frustration, the sound echoing through the garage like a sharp crack. Phase 1 was complete. That evening, I was back at the wire trap, nursing a beer and waiting for Monroe to report back on Lucas's activities. Brenda was working the bar, regaling a small crowd with some story about her ex-husband and a fishing boat, when my phone rang. It's done, Monroe said without preamble. Your boy Lucas just made a very large deposit to the charity account. Looks like he took your threat seriously. Good. What about Veronica? That's where things get interesting. She's been making calls all afternoon trying to reach her lawyer. Word is, she's not happy about what she's been hearing. Before I could respond, the bar's door swung open and Lucas himself walked in, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and his face had the pale, sweaty look of someone who'd just realized they were in serious trouble. He spotted me immediately and made a beeline for my table, ignoring the curious stares from the other patrons. You son of a witch, he said, loud enough for half the bar to hear. You think you can threaten me? I don't think anything, I replied calmly. I know I can ruin you. The question is whether you're smart enough to walk away while you still can. Walk away from Veronica? From the life we're building together? Lucas laughed, but it sounded forced. You're delusional if you think she's going to choose you over me. I don't want her to choose me. I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Lucas leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Veronica's got connections you can't imagine. She can destroy you with a phone call. Maybe, I said, taking a sip of my beer. But she can't destroy what I don't care about losing. My reputation's already shot, my kids already hate me, and my marriage is obviously over. What exactly does she have left to threaten me with? For the first time since I'd known him, Lucas looked genuinely uncertain. He'd built his entire strategy around the assumption that I'd be too civilized to fight back, too concerned about appearances to get my hands dirty. He was about to learn how wrong he was. This isn't over, he said, straightening up. No, I agreed, it's not. But you might want to think carefully about your next move. I've got nothing left to lose, Lucas. Can you say the same? He stormed out without another word, leaving me alone with my beer and a growing sense of satisfaction. Around the bar, conversations gradually resumed, but I caught several people glancing in my direction with expressions that ranged from curiosity to approval. Brenda appeared at my table with a fresh beer. On the house, she said with a grin. That was better than cable TV. Glad I could provide the entertainment. Honey, that wasn't entertainment. That was a public service. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. That boy's been running his mouth all over town about how he's going to be rich and important. Nice to see someone knock him down a peg or two. My phone buzzed with another text from Monroe. Phase 2's a go. Your wife just fired her lawyer. I smiled and raised my beer in a silent toast. The game was just getting started. The next morning brought the kind of autumn rain that seemed to seep into your bones, turning the world gray and cold. I was in Dad's study, going through his papers and trying to understand the full extent of the empire he'd built, when Veronica's car pulled into the driveway with enough force to spray gravel against the garage door. She came through the front door without knocking, technically still her right as my wife, though not for much longer, and I could hear her heels clicking against the hardwood floors like an approaching storm. Elliot! Her voice carried the kind of rage that comes from having your carefully laid plans explode in your face. We need to talk, now. I looked up from the financial documents spread across Dad's desk as she appeared in the doorway. Veronica's usually perfect appearance was showing cracks. Her hair was slightly messed from the rain, her makeup wasn't quite as flawless as usual, and there was a wild look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Good morning, Veronica. You look upset. Don't you dare play innocent with me. She stepped into the room, her hands clenched into fists. What did you do to Lucas? I had a conversation with him about the returning stolen money. Did it work? You threatened him. You blackmailed him. I gave him an opportunity to do the right thing. He chose to take it. I leaned back in Dad's chair, studying her face. Although I have to say, I'm surprised he told you about it. Most people would be too embarrassed to admit they'd been caught stealing from a children's charity. Veronica's face went through several color changes. He didn't steal anything. That money it was a loan. A loan? From a charity account? Without any paperwork or authorization. I shook my head. Even you don't believe that, Veronica? She moved closer to the desk, and I could see her hands shaking with rage. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won something? I think I've learned some interesting things about the woman I married. For instance, I never knew you were capable of stealing from children. I never stole anything. No, you just let your boyfriend do it while you looked the other way. Much more ethical. Veronica slammed her hand down on the desk hard enough to make the papers jump. Lucas is not my boyfriend. We're partners. We're building something together. Something bigger than your small-minded, pathetic little world. What exactly are you building? A criminal enterprise? We're building a future. A real future, not this museum you call a life. She gestured around the study with obvious disgust. Living in your dead father's house, running his antique business, following in his footsteps like some kind of ghost. I want more than that, Elliot. I deserve more than that. And you thought you'd found it with a 25-year-old someone with a compulsive gambling problem? Her face flushed red. Lucas has potential. He's going places. The only place Lucas is going is jail if he keeps stealing money. I stood up, moving around the desk to face her directly. But that's not really what this is about, is it? This is about you realizing that your brilliant plan has a few holes in it. What plan? The plan to take everything I own and leave me with nothing. The plan you and Lucas have been discussing in your text messages for the past year. Veronica went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You've been poisoning my children against me, destroying my friendships, setting up this whole elaborate scheme to strip me of everything Dad left me. I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the screenshots Monroe had provided. The only problem is, Dad was smarter than both of you combined. She stared at the phone screen, her face going pale as she recognized her own words. Where did you get this? Does it matter? The point is, I know exactly what you've been doing. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Veronica looked up from the phone, and for a moment I saw something like fear in her eyes. Then her expression hardened into the cold mask I'd been seeing more and more often lately. You want to play games, Elliot? Fine. But remember, I know things about you too. Things that could destroy what's left of your precious reputation. Such as? Such as the real reason you left journalism. Such as why you really started drinking after Dad got sick. Such as what really happened the night Sarah Morrison died. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sarah Morrison had been a source on a story I'd been working on 5 years ago. A whistleblower who'd been ended in a car accident before she could testify. The official investigation had cleared me of any wrongdoing, but the guilt had eaten at me for months. That was an accident, I said quietly. Was it? Because I have emails suggesting otherwise. Emails that might be very interesting to the police. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You're talking about fabricating evidence. I'm talking about revealing the truth. The truth about what kind of man you really are. And what kind of man is that? Veronica smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. The kind who gets people ended when they get in his way. We stood there staring at each other across the space that had once been my father's sanctuary. And I realized that I was looking at a stranger. The woman I'd married, the mother of my children, had been replaced by someone capable of destroying lives without a second thought. Get out, I said quietly. This is still my house, too. No, it's not. Check with your new lawyer, if you can find one who will take your case after the old one dropped you. Veronica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. This isn't over, Elliot. Oh, I agreed, it's not. But the next time you want to threaten me, you might want to make sure your boyfriend hasn't been bragging about your plans all over town. Lucas has a very big mouth for someone involved in a conspiracy. She turned and walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. The children will never forgive you for what you're about to do. They already don't forgive me for things I didn't do. At least this way, I'll have earned their hatred. After she left, I sat back down at Dad's desk and tried to process what had just happened. Veronica had threatened to frame me for homicide. Not just ruin my reputation or take my money, but actually destroy my life completely. I picked up my phone and called Monroe. I need everything you can find on Sarah Morrison's death, I said when he answered. And I mean everything. If Veronica's planning to play dirty, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. Already on it, Monroe replied. Figured she might try something like this. Give me 24 hours. What about Lucas? That's the interesting part. Your boy Lucas has been making some very stupid mistakes lately. Turns out he's been using Veronica's credit cards to pay off his gambling debts. Wanted to guess what the penalty is for credit card fraud? I felt a smile spread across my face for the first time in days. Tell me. Up to 10 years in federal prison. And that's just for starters. The game was about to get very interesting. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 days after my conversation with Veronica, I was at the Wiretrap, reviewing Monroe's latest intelligence reports when my former best friend Eric Davidson walked through the door. Eric and I had been inseparable since college, but that friendship had evaporated over the past 6 months as Veronica's poison campaign took hold. He spotted me immediately and made his way over with the determined stride of someone who'd been building up courage for this moment. Behind him came 2 other former friends, Tom Bradley and Mike Chen, both wearing expressions that suggested this wasn't going to be a pleasant reunion. Well, Eric said, sliding into the booth across from me. If it isn't the town's newest villain. Eric, Tom, Mike. I nodded to each of them in turn. To what do I owe the pleasure? Cut the crap, Elliot, Tom said, his face flushed with anger. We know what you've been doing to Veronica and that kid. And what exactly have I been doing? Threatening them, blackmailing them, trying to destroy their relationship because you can't handle the fact that your wife found someone better. I looked around the table at these three men who'd been my closest friends for over a decade, trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. Is that what Veronica told you? She didn't have to tell us anything, Mike said. We've got eyes. We've seen how you've been acting lately, how paranoid and bitter you've become. Paranoid? I pulled out my phone and showed them one of the screenshots Monroe had provided. Is it paranoia when your wife and her boyfriend are actually plotting against you? Eric glanced at the screen, but his expression didn't change. Anyone can fake text messages these days. What about bank records? Are those fake too? I showed them another document Monroe had uncovered, showing the transfers from the charity account to Lucas's personal account. Or maybe the gambling debts? Are those fake as well? Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Even if that's all true, it doesn't give you the right to terrorize them. Veronica's scared to leave her house, Elliot. That kid's talking about dropping out of school. Good. Maybe he'll find an honest way to make a living. Listen to yourself, Eric said, shaking his head. This isn't you, man. The Elliot I know would never stalk his wife or threaten a kid young enough to be his son. The Elliot you knew was naive enough to believe his wife loved him and his friends would give him the benefit of the doubt. I closed the phone and looked around the table. Apparently, I was wrong on both counts. We came here to give you a chance, Mike said, a chance to back off and let Veronica move on with her life. But if you keep this up, we're going to have to take steps. What kind of steps? The kind that involve the police and a restraining order, Tom replied. Veronica's already talked to them about your behavior. One more incident, and you'll be arrested. I felt something cold and calculating settle into place behind my ribs. These men had been my friends, my confidants, the people I'd trusted with my deepest secrets. Now they were sitting across from me, threatening to have me arrested based on lies told by a woman who'd been systematically destroying my life. Let me ask you something, I said, keeping my voice calm and level. Did any of you bother to ask for my side of the story? Did any of you think to call me before you decided I was the villain in this situation? The three of them exchanged glances, and I saw the answer in their faces. We tried calling, Eric said weakly. You never answered. I answered every call from you until 3 weeks ago, when you told me you didn't want to get involved in my marital problems. Remember that conversation, Eric? His face reddened, but he pressed on. That was different. We didn't know how bad things had gotten. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe Veronica's version of events than to consider the possibility that your friend might need help. I stood up, tossing a 20 on the table to cover my beer. But here's the thing, gentlemen. I don't need your help anymore. I don't need your friendship, your approval, or your permission to defend myself against people who are trying to destroy me. Elliot, wait, Tom said. But I was already walking toward the door. Give Veronica a message for me, I called back over my shoulder. Tell her the gloves are coming off. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the stale atmosphere of betrayal I just left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Monroe. Package delivered, check your email. I sat in my car and opened the email attachment Monroe had sent. It was a comprehensive dossier on Lucas Brand, and the contents were even more damaging than I'd hoped. The gambling debts were just the beginning. Lucas had also been using fake credentials to get into law school, had outstanding warrants in 2 other states, and had been running a small-time identity theft operation using information stolen from Veronica's charity clients. But the real bombshell was in the final pages. Lucas was already married, had been for 3 years, to a woman in California who thought he was working as a consultant in Boston. I scrolled through the marriage certificate, the photos, the evidence of a completely separate life Lucas had been hiding from everyone, including Veronica. The man she thought she was building a future with was not only a criminal, but a bigamist. My phone rang and Veronica's name appeared on the caller ID. You son of a witch, she said without preamble. What did you say to Eric and the others? I told them the truth. Did they deliver my message? Your message? Your message was to threaten my friends? My message was that I'm done playing defense. From now on, Veronica, this is war. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You have no idea what you're starting. Actually, I do. I'm starting the systematic destruction of everything you and Lucas have built together. I'm going to expose every lie, every theft, every dirty secret you've been hiding. You can't prove anything, can't I? Check your email, Veronica. I just sent you something I think you'll find very interesting. I hung up and forwarded Monroe's dossier to Veronica's personal email account. Then I sat back and waited for her to discover that the man she'd destroyed her marriage for was already married to someone else. The phone rang again 30 seconds later. You're lying, Veronica said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Call the Los Angeles County Clerk's office. The marriage certificate is a matter of public record. Another long pause. Even if this is true, it doesn't change anything. I still love him. Love him? You love a criminal who's been lying to you about everything, including his marital status? He can get a divorce. We can work this out. Can you? Because I'm pretty sure bigamy is a felony in Maine, and identity theft, and credit card fraud. How exactly are you planning to work around federal prison? I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, quick and shallow, like someone on the verge of panic. What do you want? She asked finally. I want my children back. I want you to admit what you've done and undo the damage you've caused. And if I don't, then Lucas goes to prison, you go down as an accomplice, and everyone in town learns exactly what kind of people you really are. You're bluffing, am I? Why don't you ask Lucas what he thinks? I'm sure he'll have some very interesting explanations for his wife in California. I hung up and started the car, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. The final pieces were falling into place, and soon Veronica and Lucas would understand exactly what it felt like to have their carefully constructed world collapse around them. But first, I had one more stop to make. The Harborview Country Club sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, its manicured grounds and elegant colonial architecture serving as a monument to old money and older secrets. It was hosting Veronica's charity fundraiser tonight, the same charity Lucas had been stealing from, and half the town's social elite would be there, including Veronica and Lucas, who had no idea what was waiting for them. I adjusted my tie and walked through the main entrance like I belonged there, which I did. My family had been members for 3 generations, and even Veronica's best efforts hadn't been enough to get me expelled, yet. The ballroom was decorated in the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables laden with silent auction items. The crowd was exactly what you'd expect. Men in expensive suits discussing business deals, women in designer dresses comparing vacation plans, everyone carefully maintaining the facade of respectability that kept polite society functioning. I spotted Veronica near the stage, resplendent in a black evening gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She was talking to the event coordinator, her face animated with the kind of enthusiasm she reserved for public appearances. Lucas stood beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, playing the role of devoted partner to perfection. They hadn't seen me yet, which gave me time to position myself near the back of the room and wait for the right moment. Monroe was somewhere in the crowd, recording everything with the kind of discreet surveillance equipment that would make the NSA jealous. The evening's program began with the usual speeches about the importance of helping underprivileged children, the difference their donations would make, the vital work the charity was doing in the community. Veronica took the stage to thunderous applause, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system as she talked about dedication, integrity, and the responsibility of those blessed with wealth to help those less fortunate. It was a masterful performance, and I almost felt bad about what I was going to do to her. When Veronica finished her speech and the applause died down, I made my move. I walked to the front of the room, ignoring the confused murmurs from the crowd, and stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, I'd like to add a few words about the charity we're supporting tonight. Veronica's face went white, but she couldn't stop me without causing a scene that would raise even more questions. My name is Elliot Harrow, and I'm Veronica's husband. Some of you may have heard that we're going through a difficult time, and that's true. What you probably haven't heard is why. The crowd had gone completely silent, everyone sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. You see, I recently discovered that someone has been stealing money from this charity. Thousands of dollars that should have gone to help children has instead been used to fund gambling debts, expensive cars, and luxury vacations. I pulled out a folder and began reading from Monroe's reports. In the past 6 months alone, over $50,000 has been diverted from charity accounts to personal use. The person responsible has been using this money to maintain a lifestyle far beyond his means, all while standing beside my wife and talking about integrity and responsibility. Lucas had gone pale, but he was trapped on the stage with nowhere to run. But that's not the most interesting part, I continued. The most interesting part is that this person, this pillar of moral virtue, is already married to someone else, that has been for 3 years, in fact. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, but I wasn't finished. Lucas Brand, ladies and gentlemen, thief, bigamist, and fraud. The man my wife chose to replace me. Lucas finally found his voice. This is all lies. He's making this up because he can't handle losing. Am I? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. Let's listen to some recordings of you discussing your plans. Lucas's own voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear and unmistakably him. Once the old man dies, everything will be ours. Elliot's too trusting to see it coming. The crowd's murmurs turned to gasps of outrage. I played several more recordings, each one more damaging than the last, painting a picture of a conspiracy so callous and calculating that even this jaded crowd was shocked. When the recordings ended, the ballroom was silent, except for the sound of people breathing. I have copies of all the financial records, I said into the microphone. Bank statements, credit card receipts, gambling debts, everything. I've already turned them over to the police and the district attorney's office. Lucas broke first. He lunged toward me with a snarl of rage, but I was ready for him. I stepped aside and let his momentum carry him past me, then grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back in a move I'd learned from Monroe. Ladies and gentlemen, I said as Lucas struggled in my grip, I present to you the future of charitable giving in our community. Security finally arrived and took Lucas away, but the damage was done. The crowd was buzzing with outrage and excitement. Cell phones were recording everything, and Veronica stood frozen on the stage like a deer in headlights. As for my wife, I said, looking directly at her, I think she has some explaining to do. Veronica finally found her voice. This is all a misunderstanding. I had no idea about any of this. Didn't you? I played one more recording, this one of Veronica's voice discussing the plan to turn the children against me. You've been planning this for almost a year, Veronica. You've stolen money, destroyed relationships, and poisoned my children against me. All for what? A bigamist who was using you just as much as he was using everyone else? The crowd was getting restless, some people heading for the exits, while others pulled out their phones to record the drama. Veronica looked around desperately, realizing that her carefully constructed social position was crumbling in real time. The charity will be returning all donations from tonight's event, I announced. Every penny will be audited and accounted for. Those of you who actually care about helping children rather than just appearing charitable might want to consider donating to organizations with better oversight. I walked off the stage and through the crowd, ignoring the questions and comments being thrown at me from all directions. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, a sharp contrast to the stifling atmosphere of betrayal and corruption I'd just left behind. Monroe was waiting by my car, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. That was better than anything Hollywood could have scripted. Is it over? For Lucas? Absolutely. The FBI will pick him up tomorrow morning on federal charges. For Veronica? He shrugged. That depends on how much she knew and how good her lawyer is. And my children? That's going to take time, but now that the truth is out, they'll have to decide who they believe. I got in my car and drove home through the quiet streets, past the houses where my former friends lived, past the places where Veronica and I had once been happy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers, investigators, reporters, and the slow process of rebuilding a life that had been systematically destroyed. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The house was dark when I arrived, but there was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. I approached cautiously, wondering if Veronica had sent someone to confront me, but the figure sitting on my front steps was much smaller than I'd expected. Dad? Maddie's voice was small and uncertain in the darkness. She stood up as I approached, and I could see she'd been crying. Maddie, what are you doing here? I saw the video. Someone posted it online. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Is it true? All of it? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months, and saw not the angry teenager who'd disowned me at the funeral, but a confused and frightened child who'd been manipulated by people she trusted. Yes, I said quietly, it's all true. She said you were the one who was lying. She said you were trying to hurt us. I would never hurt you, Maddie. Either of you. You and Owen are the most important things in my life. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I believed her. I pulled my daughter into a hug, feeling her sob against my chest, and realized that maybe, just maybe, not everything had been lost after all. Where's Owen? I asked. At Mom's. He's having a hard time with all this. He's angry at everyone. That's okay. He has a right to be angry. You both do. We stood there on the front steps of the house, where I'd grown up, where my father had taught me about honor and integrity, where 3 generations of Harrows had built something worth preserving. The wind carried the scent of salt air from the harbor, mixing with the smell of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. What happens now? Maddie asked. Now we figure out how to be a family again. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we'll figure it out. What about Mom? I thought about Veronica, probably sitting in some lawyer's office right now trying to figure out how to minimize the damage from tonight's revelations. I thought about the woman I'd married 18 years ago, the mother of my children, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future. Your mother made her choices, I said finally. Now she has to live with the consequences. Maddie nodded and wiped her eyes again. Can I stay here tonight? I don't want to go back to her house. Of course, this is your home too. We went inside together and I made hot chocolate while she called Owen to tell him where she was. I could hear her side of the conversation, patient and loving as she tried to explain what had happened and why she'd chosen to come here. When she hung up, she looked exhausted but more peaceful than I'd seen her in months. He'll come around, she said. Owen's stubborn, but he's not stupid. Once he processes everything, he'll realize Mom was lying to us. And if he doesn't, then we'll keep trying until he does. We're family, Dad. That has to count for something. I looked at my daughter, 17 years old and wise beyond her years, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old house and carrying with it the promise of storms to come. But inside, for the first time in months, everything felt warm and safe and right. The war was over. I had won. But more importantly, I had my daughter back, and that was worth more than any revenge I could have imagined. Lucas Brand was arrested the next morning on federal charges that would put him away for at least a decade. Veronica was charged as an accessory and agreed to a plea bargain that involved full restitution to the charity and 3 years of probation. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, with Veronica receiving exactly what my father's will allowed: 1/3 of the marital assets and nothing more. She left town shortly after, moving to Florida where her sister lived and where, hopefully, she could start over without destroying any more lives. Owen eventually came home too, angry and hurt, but willing to listen. It took months of family therapy and honest conversations, but slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what had been broken. The antique business thrived, partly because of the publicity from the scandal, but mostly because I threw myself into the work with renewed passion. The old house on the bluff became a home again, filled with laughter and arguments and all the messy complications of family life. And sometimes, late at night when the wind was blowing in from the harbor, I would sit in Dad's study and think about the lessons he'd taught me about honor, integrity, and the importance of fighting for what matters most. Revenge, it turned out, was not nearly as sweet as redemption, but it had been absolutely necessary to get there.